The photograph arrived on a Tuesday morning, slipped beneath my apartment door like a whisper from the dead. It was creased down the middle, yellowed at the edges, and it showed a girl I hadn't seen in 28 years. She was standing in front of a farmhouse, wearing a faded blue dress, her dark hair caught mid-flight by some forgotten wind. On the back, written in handwriting I didn't recognize, were 4 words that made my blood run cold. She never left town. My name is Daniel Porter, and for nearly 3 decades, I believe my sister Mary Catherine Edwards disappeared in the summer of 1995. I believed she ran away, just like the police said. Just like my mother insisted through tears that eventually dried into silence. Just like the whole town of Millbrook, Tennessee whispered over church potlucks and grocery store aisles. But that photograph changed everything. Because the farmhouse in that picture, I recognized it. And it wasn't somewhere far away in a city where runaways go to start over. It was less than 4 miles from where I grew up. 4 miles from the bedroom where I last saw my sister alive. Before I go any further, I need you to understand something. This story isn't just about a missing girl. It's about the lies families tell to survive, the secrets small towns bury beneath their Sunday smiles, and the devastating truth that sometimes the people we trust most are the ones we should fear. If you've ever wondered what really happens behind closed doors in those quiet neighborhoods, if you've ever suspected that the official story wasn't the whole story, then you need to stay until the very end. What I'm about to tell you will change how you look at missing person cases forever. And if this resonates with you, if you know someone who deserves to hear this, share this story. Subscribe to this channel. Because stories like Mary Catherine's only get told when people like you refuse to let them be forgotten. Now, let me take you back to where it all began. Millbrook in 1995 was the kind of place where everybody knew everybody, and everybody pretended not to notice when something was wrong. Population 1,200. 1 stoplight. 3 churches. And secrets buried so deep you'd need a backhoe and a lifetime to dig them all up. Mary Catherine was 17 that summer. I was 13, still young enough to worship my older sister, but old enough to notice when things weren't right. She was beautiful in that effortless way that made other girls jealous and boys stupid. Long dark hair that our mother called her crowning glory. Eyes the color of sweet tea. A laugh that could fill up a room and make you forget your troubles. But that summer, she stopped laughing. I remember the first time I noticed the change. It was early June, the kind of evening where the humidity sat on your skin like a wet blanket and the lightning bugs were just starting to come out. Mary Catherine was sitting on the porch swing, which wasn't unusual. What was unusual was that she wasn't reading. My sister always had a book in her hand. Always. She'd read anything she could get, from library novels to cereal boxes. But that night, she was just staring out at the tree line behind our property, her hands folded in her lap, her eyes fixed on something I couldn't see. "What are you looking at?" I asked, plopping down beside her. She jumped like I'd fired a gun. "Nothing. Don't sneak up on me like that, Danny." I didn't sneak. I walked regular. She didn't respond. Just went back to staring at those trees. "Mary Cat, you okay?" That's when she turned to look at me, and I saw something in her eyes I'd never seen before. Fear. Real fear. The kind that lives in your bones. "Danny, if anything ever happens to me, I need you to remember something." My heart started beating faster. "What do you mean, if anything happens?" "Just listen. Remember the old Miller place? The farmhouse off County Road 7. I nodded. Everyone knew the Miller place. It had been abandoned for years, ever since old Henry Miller died and his kids couldn't agree on what to do with the property. We used to dare each other to run up and touch the front door, then sprint away like demons were chasing us. "If I ever go missing, Danny, you look there. You promise me." "Why would you go missing? You're scaring me." She grabbed my hand, squeezed it hard. "Promise me." "I promise." Then our mother's voice cut through the evening air like a knife. "Supper's ready. Mary Catherine, get in here and help set the table." My sister let go of my hand, and just like that, the moment was over. She plastered on a smile, stood up, and walked inside like we hadn't just had the strangest conversation of my young life. I should have pushed harder. I should have demanded answers. But I was 13, and I figured she was just being dramatic. Teenagers were dramatic. That's what everyone said. 6 weeks later, my sister vanished. It was August 15th, a Friday. I remember because it was the night before the county fair, and I was supposed to compete in the pig calling contest. Stupid, I know, but it was a big deal to me at the time. Mary Catherine had promised to come watch, had promised to cheer louder than anyone. She never got the chance. The official story went like this. Mary Catherine Edwards, 17, left home sometime during the night of August 15th. She packed a bag, left a note saying she couldn't stay anymore, and walked out the front door into the darkness. The note was found on her pillow. Her window was open. Her favorite books were gone. Case closed. Runaway teenager. Happens all the time. Except I never believed it. Not for one single second. Because I knew my sister. Mary Catherine wasn't running toward something. She was running from something. And whatever it was right here in Millbrook. But nobody wanted to hear that. Not the police. Not the neighbors. And especially not my parents. My father, Earl Edwards, was a deacon at First Baptist Church and the manager of the only hardware store in town. He was respected, admired, the kind of man other men wanted to be. When Mary Catherine disappeared, he handled it with what everyone called remarkable grace. He answered the police questions calmly. He thanked the search volunteers politely. He stood in front of the congregation that Sunday and asked for prayers for his wayward daughter. And then he never spoke her name again. My mother, Patricia, fell apart in a different way. She didn't stop functioning. If anything, she functioned harder. Cleaned the house until the floors gleamed. Cooked meals nobody ate. Smiled at neighbors until her face must have ached from the effort. But she stopped sleeping. I'd hear her pacing the hallways at 3 in the morning, walking past Mary Catherine's closed bedroom door again and again, never opening it, never going in. And me? I became a ghost in my own home. The little brother who asked too many questions. The child who wouldn't let it go. She ran away, Daniel. Accept it. That's what my father said every time I brought up my sister. Accept it. Move on. Stop causing trouble. But how do you accept something your gut tells you is a lie? For years, I did what they wanted. I stopped asking questions. I focused on school, then college, then a career in journalism that took me far away from Millbrook and its suffocating secrets. I built a life. I tried to forget. But the dead have a way of refusing to stay buried. And some promises, made on a porch swing at 13 years old, have a way of coming back around. That photograph was my sister's promise, finally demanding to be kept. She never left town. I didn't sleep the night I received that photograph. I sat at my kitchen table in my Chicago apartment, staring at my sister's face, trying to reconcile the girl in the image with my memories. She looked older than 17. Harder. Like life had been unkind. But it was definitely her. Same eyes. Same slight tilt to her head when she was thinking. The farmhouse in the background was unmistakably the Miller place. I recognized the distinctive wraparound porch, the broken shutters, the oak tree that leaned toward the house like it was trying to tell it a secret. But the Miller place had been abandoned in 1995. So why was my sister photographed there? And more importantly, who sent me this photograph and why now? I called in sick to work the next morning. Then I booked a flight to Nashville, rented a car, and made the 3-hour drive to Millbrook for the first time in almost 15 years. My mother had died 8 years ago. Cancer. She went quickly, which was a blessing, though she used her last lucid moments to tell me that Mary Catherine had loved me. Not loves. Loved. Past tense. Even at the end, she refused to acknowledge the possibility that my sister might still be alive. My father was still breathing, technically. He lived in the same house where we grew up, though a home health aide now helped him with the basics. His mind was going, the doctors said. Some days, he remembered everything. Most days, he remembered nothing. I didn't go to see him first. Maybe that makes me a bad son, but I'd stopped caring about being a good son years ago. Good sons don't get haunted by dead sisters. Good sons accept the official story and move on. Instead, I drove straight to the Miller property. It had changed in 30 years, but not in ways you'd expect. Someone had been maintaining it. The grass was cut. The porch had been repaired. The shutters that had been broken in 1995 were now intact, painted a cheerful blue that seemed obscene given what I suspected had happened here. I sat in my rental car at the edge of the property, my heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my teeth. This was it. This was where my sister's trail had gone cold. This was where the truth was waiting. Or maybe it was a trap. The thought occurred to me too late. Whoever sent that photograph wanted me here. They'd baited the hook with my sister's face, and I'd swallowed it whole. For all I knew, I was walking into something I wouldn't walk out of. But I got out of the car anyway. Because some questions demand answers, even when the answers might destroy you. The front door was unlocked. That should have been my first warning. Inside, the house smelled like pine sol and old wood. Someone had cleaned recently. The floors were swept. The windows were washed. On the mantel above a fireplace that looked well-used sat a row of photographs in simple frames. I crossed the room on legs that felt like they belonged to someone else. The photographs showed a woman I didn't recognize at first. She was middle-aged, with graying hair and deep lines around her eyes. In one picture, she was standing in a garden, holding a basket of tomatoes. In another, she was sitting in a rocking chair on the porch I'd just crossed, reading a book. In a third, she was blowing out candles on a birthday cake, while someone just out of frame held her shoulder. It took me a full minute to realize I was looking at my sister. Not Mary Catherine at 17, frozen in time like I'd imagined her all these years. Mary Catherine at 45, living a life I knew nothing about, aging in a house that everyone thought was abandoned, just 4 miles from where we grew up. She never left town. The words from the photograph echoed in my mind like a scream. I was wondering when you'd show up. I spun around so fast I nearly fell. A woman stood in the doorway that led to what I assumed was the kitchen. She was wearing jeans and a flannel shirt, her gray-streaked dark hair pulled back in a practical ponytail. Her eyes, sweet tea-colored, unmistakable, watched me with a mixture of emotions I couldn't quite read. "Mary Cat." My voice came out as a whisper. "Hello, Danny." I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. For 28 years, I'd imagined this moment. I'd rehearsed what I'd say, the questions I'd ask, the explanations I'd demand. But now that she was standing in front of me, alive and real and older than I'd ever pictured her, all those carefully planned words evaporated. "You're alive," I managed. "I am. You've been here. This whole time. You've been here. Not the whole time. But mostly yes." The room tilted. I grabbed the mantel to steady myself, knocking one of the photographs to the floor. The glass cracked, but didn't shatter. My sister, my living, breathing sister, didn't move to pick it up. Why? It was the only word I could form. "That's a complicated question, Danny." "Then give me a complicated answer." The anger came from nowhere, hot and sudden. "I've spent almost 30 years thinking you were dead. Mom died believing you were dead. And you've been 4 miles away this entire time? Why?" "Because it was the only way to stay alive." That stopped me cold. "What are you talking about?" Mary Catherine crossed the room slowly, her eyes never leaving my face. When she reached me, she took my hands in hers, and I noticed they were rough. Working hands. Not the soft hands of the girl who'd rather read than do chores. "There's so much I need to tell you," she said. "Things that are going to be hard to hear. Things that are going to make you question everything you thought you knew about our family. Then tell me." She shook her head. "Not yet. First, I need to know something. The photograph I sent you. Did you show it to anyone? Did you tell anyone where you were going?" "No. I came straight here." "You're sure? Not a friend? Not a colleague? No one?" I wanted answers first. She let out a breath that seemed to release years of tension. "Good. That's good. Because if he knew you were here, we'd both be in danger." "If who knew?" My sister looked at me with those familiar eyes, and for the first time, I saw the fear that had lived there since that summer night on the porch swing. "Our father, Danny. Dad is the reason I had to disappear, and he's the reason I've been hiding all these years." Let me pause here and ask you something. Have you ever looked back at your childhood and realized that something you accepted as normal was actually deeply wrong? Have you ever discovered that the people you trusted most were wearing masks you couldn't see? I'd love to hear your story in the comments below, because the truth I was about to learn would shatter every illusion I'd ever held about my family. My father, Earl Edwards, was the kind of man everyone in Millbrook admired. He taught Sunday school. He sponsored Little League teams. He organized the annual Christmas food drive. When neighbors needed help, he He was the first one there with a toolbox and a smile. He was also, according to my sister, a monster. We sat at the kitchen table in the Miller farmhouse. Her farmhouse, I was beginning to understand, while she told me things that made me want to cover my ears like a child. It started when I was 15, Mary Catherine said, her voice flat, clinical, like she was describing something that happened to someone else. Maybe earlier. I'm not sure. Memory is a funny thing. It protects you sometimes, buries things so deep you can't find them. What started? I asked, though some part of me already knew. Some part of me had always known. The touching, the comments, the way he'd look at me when Mom wasn't watching. My stomach turned. At first I thought I was imagining things. Overreacting. That's what he said when I finally confronted him. He said I was being dramatic. Hysterical. He said I was trying to destroy the family with my lies. Mary Cat, let me finish. I need to tell this all at once, or I won't be able to tell it at all. I nodded, though every word was a knife in my chest. By the time I was 17, it had gotten worse. Much worse. He'd come into my room at night, when Mom was taking her sleeping pills. He'd tell me that I was special, that he loved me more than anyone, that what we had was our secret. And if I ever told anyone, he'd make sure everyone knew I was a liar. A troubled girl who made up stories for attention. Did you tell anyone? Mom. The laugh that came from my sister was hollow, bitter. I tried once. Mom walked in on something. Not the worst of it, but enough. Enough that she should have known. What happened? She slapped me. Told me to stop provoking my father. Told me that whatever happened was my fault for being tempting. I felt sick. Actually, physically sick. The mother I'd grieved for 8 years, the woman I'd remembered with love, had known. She'd known what was happening to her daughter and blamed her for it. I planned to leave the day I turned 18, Mary Catherine continued. I had money saved. Not much, but enough to get somewhere, anywhere. But then he found out about Michael. Who's Michael? A boy from the next town over. I met him at the county library. He was kind, Danny. So kind. He wanted to help me get away. We made plans. We were going to leave together. What happened to him? My sister's eyes filled with tears for the first time since she'd started speaking. Dad found the letters we'd been writing each other. I'd hidden them in a book in my room, but he found them. He was always finding things. Always watching. Mary Cat, what happened to Michael? He died. 2 weeks before I was supposed to leave. Car accident, they said. Lost control on a country road. Wrapped his truck around a tree. You think Dad. I know Dad. I know what he was capable of. He made sure I knew too. The night after Michael's funeral, he came to my room and said, "See what happens when you try to leave me? Everyone you love gets hurt." Then he. She couldn't finish. She didn't have to. The note, I said suddenly. The runaway note the police found. You didn't write it. No, he did. He'd been practicing my handwriting for months. I found out later that he'd been planning it. If I wouldn't stay willingly, he'd make sure I stayed a different way. I don't understand. If you didn't run away, what happened the night of August 15th? Mary Catherine stood and walked to the window, looking out at the same tree line she'd stared at all those years ago on our porch swing. He came to my room that night. But I was ready. I'd been ready since Michael died. I'd gotten a knife from the kitchen and hidden it under my mattress. My blood ran cold. Did you kill him? She laughed again, that hollow sound. No, though God knows I wanted to. I cut him. His arm. Enough to get away. Enough to run. You came here. To the Miller place. Henry Miller's daughter, Ruth, she knew about our father. She was one of his victims too, years before me. She'd fled Millbrook, but she'd kept the farmhouse. When she heard I was in trouble, there's a network, Danny, women who help other women escape. She let me stay here. For 28 years. Not continuously. I moved around at first. Different safe houses. Different identities. I became Sarah Miller, Ruth's distant cousin. Got a GED. Took online classes. Built a life. But I always came back here. It was the one place he'd never think to look because it was so close. Why didn't you go to the police? Mary Catherine turned to look at me with an expression of profound sadness. Danny, you were 13. You remember what Dad was like. Who he knew. The sheriff was his hunting buddy. The county prosecutor came to our house for barbecues. In a town like Millbrook, men like our father don't get punished. Girls like me get destroyed for speaking up. She was right. I knew she was right. But the injustice of it burned in my chest. What about me? I asked. You could have told me. You could have let me know you were alive. And put you in danger? He was already suspicious of you, Danny. The way you kept asking questions, refusing to let it go. If you'd known where I was, if you tried to see me, he would have known. And then I would have ended up like Michael. The silence that followed was suffocating. I wanted to tell you so many times, she whispered. Every birthday, every holiday. I'd write you letters I never sent. I watched you from a distance when you graduated high school. I was there when you published your first article for the Nashville paper. I've been watching you your whole life, Danny. Protecting you the only way I knew how. By letting me grieve for you. By letting you live. I sat there in the kitchen of a farmhouse I'd been told was abandoned, looking at my sister who'd been declared a runaway, trying to reconcile everything I thought I knew with everything I was learning. It was too much. It was all too much. But there was still one question I hadn't asked. Why now? I demanded. Why send me that photograph after all these years? Why reveal yourself now? Mary Catherine sat back down across from me. She reached out and took my hands again. Because Dad is dying. The doctors say he has maybe 2 months left. And when he dies, I want to reclaim my life. My real life. I want to be Mary Catherine Edwards again, not Sarah Miller. I want to tell the world what happened to me, what he did, and make sure no one else ever suffers the way I suffered. That's why you need me. You're a journalist, Danny. You know how to tell stories that people believe. You have credibility. You have platforms. If I come forward alone, I'm just a crazy woman who faked her own disappearance. But if we do this together, if we expose the truth with evidence and documentation and your professional reputation behind it, we can destroy him. My sister smiled for the first time since I'd arrived. It was a small smile, uncertain, but real. We can set me free. Over the next 3 weeks, I learned more about my family's history than I'd ever wanted to know. Mary Catherine had been collecting evidence for decades. Letters our father had written her. Medical records from a hospital visit in 1994 that showed unexplained injuries consistent with repeated trauma. Photographs she'd taken of bruises on her own body, dated and cataloged with the precision of someone who knew they might someday need to prove their own suffering. She had records of other women too. At least 7 others who had come forward to her over the years. Women who had been children when Earl Edwards entered their lives. A neighbor's daughter. A girl from the church youth group. 2 of his students from the Sunday school classes he taught for over 3 decades. None of them had ever reported him. The few who'd tried had been dismissed, discredited, destroyed. Our father was a pillar of the community, after all, and his victims were just troubled girls telling lies. How did you find them all? I asked one evening as we sat surrounded by boxes of documentation. They found me. Word spreads in certain circles. When women hear that someone else survived the same monster, they reach out. They want to know they're not alone. And you've been building a case this whole time. A case that no one would believe while he was healthy and powerful. But now, she trailed off, a complicated expression crossing her face. Now he's weak. Now he's dying. And dying men sometimes tell the truth. I looked at my sister, saw the steel beneath her surface, and understood for the first time what she was really asking of me. You want me to get a confession. I want you to confront him. Record it. Document whatever he says. Even if he denies everything, his reaction will be damning. And if he's scared enough, guilty enough, maybe he'll slip. He's been hiding for so long, Danny. Longer than you know. Men like him, they get tired of pretending. Part of them wants to be caught. Part of them wants someone to finally acknowledge what they've gotten away with. I thought about my father in that house where I grew up, being cared for by strangers, his mind slipping away day by day. I thought about visiting him, looking into his eyes, and asking him if he destroyed my sister's life. I thought about what I would do if he said yes. I'll do it, I told her. But first I need you to tell me something. In 28 years of hiding, of watching from the shadows, did you ever regret it? Did you ever think about just letting go? Moving on completely? Building a life where he couldn't touch you even in memory? Mary Catherine was quiet for a long moment. Every day, she finally admitted. Every single day? There were times I almost did it. Almost walked away, changed my name for good, started fresh somewhere he'd never find me. I could have become someone else entirely. Why didn't you? Because of you, Danny. Because you never stopped believing something was wrong. Because every time I watched you from a distance, I saw a little boy who loved his sister, and I couldn't let that boy think his sister was just gone. Even if I couldn't be with you, I couldn't completely abandon you. But you did abandon me, I said, and I wasn't proud of the bitterness in my voice. You let me think you were dead. You let me grow up in that house with him, never knowing. What could I have done? Her voice cracked. Take you with me? You were 13. It would have been kidnapping. They would have found us, brought you back, and then he would have had another weapon to use against me. Leave you a note? Tell you the truth? And what? Make a child responsible for keeping a secret that dangerous. You could have told the authorities. I told you what happened when I tried. No one believed me. No one protected me. The system was designed for men like our father, Danny. It still is. We sat in silence after that, the weight of years of loss and separation heavy between us. I wanted to rage. I wanted to weep. I wanted to understand completely, and I knew I never fully would. I hadn't lived her nightmare. I'd only lived in its shadow. But I could do this for her now. I could be the one thing she'd never had during all those years of abuse and terror, a witness who believed her, a voice that would carry her story to the world, a brother who would stand beside her when she finally stepped out of the shadows. Okay, I said at last. Tomorrow I'll go see him. Tomorrow we start taking back everything he stole from you. Mary Catherine reached across the table and squeezed my hand. Thank you, Danny. Don't thank me yet. Thank me when it's over. The house where I grew up looked smaller than I remembered. Isn't that always the way? The places that loomed so large in our childhood turn out to be just ordinary buildings, ordinary rooms, ordinary walls that hold extraordinary secrets. I parked in the driveway and sat for a moment, gathering my courage. In my pocket was a small recording device. In my heart was a fury I hadn't known I was capable of feeling. The home health aide answered the door. Her name was Belinda, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes and tired hands. She explained that my father was having a good day, which meant he was lucid enough to recognize people and carry on a conversation. He'll be so happy to see you, she said as she led me inside. He talks about you sometimes. His son, the big city journalist. I said nothing. What could I say? That the man she cared for was a predator? That his good reputation was built on the suffering of girls who couldn't fight back? My father was sitting in a recliner in the living room, facing the window that looked out on the backyard. He was thinner than I remembered, his once powerful frame diminished by illness. But when he turned to look at me, his eyes were sharp, calculating. The eyes of the man who had ruled our household with a combination of charm and terror. Daniel, what a surprise. Hello, Dad. Belinda, would you give us some privacy? Maybe make some coffee. The aide nodded and disappeared into the kitchen. I sat down across from my father, close enough to see the yellowing of his skin, the slight tremor in his hands. You didn't come for my birthday, he said, or for Christmas. In fact, I can't remember the last time you bothered to visit your dying father. I've been busy. Too busy for family? I raised you better than that. The audacity of that statement nearly made me laugh. Instead, I reached into my pocket and touched the recording device, making sure it was still running. I want to talk to you about Mary Catherine. Something flickered in his eyes. Fear? Anger? Both. Your sister ran away 30 years ago. There's nothing to talk about. She didn't run away. A long pause. My father studied me with that predator's gaze I was only now learning to recognize. What do you mean? I mean she didn't leave. She never left Millbrook. She's been here all along, hiding from you. The silence that followed was so complete I could hear the clock ticking in the hallway. My father's expression didn't change, but something behind his eyes shifted. A door slamming shut. A mask being adjusted. I don't know what lies she's been telling you. They're not lies. I've seen the evidence. The photographs, the medical records, the testimonies from other women. I know what you did to her, Dad. I know what you did to all of them. My father laughed. It was a cold, humorless sound. Other women? What on earth are you talking about? I'm a deacon, a respected member of this community. I've spent my entire life serving others. You spent your entire life destroying young girls. You just did it where no one could see. This is absurd." He started to rise from his chair, but his body was too weak. He fell back with a grunt of frustration. "Your sister was always troubled, always telling stories. That's why she ran away. She couldn't face reality. She didn't run away. You faked the note. You made her disappear because she tried to escape, and you couldn't let her tell the truth. You have no proof of anything." "Actually, I do. But here's what's interesting, Dad. I'm not here to argue with you. I'm here to offer you a choice." His eyes narrowed. "What kind of choice?" "You can die with your reputation intact. Take your secrets to the grave. Let everyone in this town remember you as the good man you pretended to be. Or you can confess. Right now, on record. Tell me what you did to my sister. Tell me about the others. Give us the truth, and we'll handle it privately. Your name won't be dragged through the mud. You can die with some dignity." It was a bluff, of course. We had no intention of staying quiet regardless of what he said. But I needed to see his reaction. I needed to know if there was any remorse buried somewhere beneath the monster. My father was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice was different. Lower. More honest than I'd ever heard it. "You want the truth? Fine. Here's the truth. Your sister was a tease from the time she was 13 years old. She walked around that house knowing exactly what she was doing, tempting me, testing me. If I occasionally lost control, it was because she pushed me to it." My hands clenched into fists. She was a child. She was old enough to know what she wanted. And she wanted attention. My attention. She seduced me, Daniel. Whatever happened between us, she initiated. The recording device captured every word. Every disgusting, victim-blaming word. "What about the others? The neighbor's daughter? The girls from your Sunday school?" He smiled then, and it was the most horrifying thing I'd ever seen. A smile of satisfaction. Of pride. Those girls needed discipline. They needed guidance. I provided it. If some of them misinterpreted my affection, that's their problem, not mine. You're admitting it. You're actually admitting what you did. I'm admitting that I lived my life the way I wanted to live it. That I took what I needed from a world that owed me plenty. And no one, not you, not your sister, not any of those lying little tramps, is going to take that away from me now. I stood up so quickly my chair fell backward. Every instinct in my body screamed at me to hurt him, to make him feel even a fraction of the pain he'd caused. My hands shook with the effort of restraining myself. "You're wrong about that," I said. "Everything is going to be taken from you. Your reputation, your legacy, your name. By the time we're done, Earl Edwards will be remembered for exactly what he was. A pedophile and an abuser who spent 60 years hiding behind a cross and a smile." For the first time, I saw a real fear in my father's eyes. The fear of a man who finally understood that his past had caught up with him. "You wouldn't. You'd destroy yourself too. The son of a monster? No one will ever look at you the same way. I don't care. That's the difference between us, Dad. I'm willing to sacrifice my reputation to tell the truth. You sacrificed your daughter to maintain a lie." I walked toward the door, then turned back one final time. "By the way, you should know something. Mary Catherine is alive. She's healthy. She's strong. And she's the one who's going to tell this story to the world. You tried to break her, and you failed. Whatever hell is waiting for you, know that she won. In the end, she won." I left him sitting there, alone with his fury and his fear, and I didn't look back. The story broke 3 weeks later. I published it first in a national magazine, a 10,000-word investigative piece that detailed Earl Edwards' decades of abuse, featured testimony from 7 survivors, including my sister, and presented the recorded confession that made denial impossible. Within days, the article had been picked up by every major news outlet in the country. But unlike what happens in so many cases like this, the story didn't end with exposure. It ended with justice. My father died 6 weeks after my confrontation with him, but his death didn't stop the wheels of accountability from turning. If anything, it accelerated them. The Tennessee Bureau of Investigation opened a formal inquiry into the handling of my sister's 1995 disappearance. What they found was damning beyond anything we'd anticipated. Former Sheriff Harold Briggs, my father's longtime hunting buddy, had deliberately suppressed evidence that contradicted the runaway narrative. Witnesses who had reported seeing my sister in distress had been ignored. A neighbor who had heard screaming from our house the night of August 15th had been told to mind her own business. Most devastatingly, a young deputy named Marcus Webb had filed a report expressing concerns about the case, only to have that report mysteriously vanish from the files. Deputy Webb, now in his 60s, came forward after reading my article. He'd kept a copy of that original report, hidden in his personal files for nearly 3 decades. It documented inconsistencies in my father's account, noted the suspicious lack of investigation into where Mary Catherine might have gone, and recommended that Earl Edwards be considered a person of interest. That report had been buried by Sheriff Briggs himself. Harold Briggs was arrested on charges of obstruction of justice, official misconduct, and conspiracy to conceal a felony. At 78 years old, he stood in a courtroom and heard the charges read against him. His lawyer argued that he was too old and frail to stand trial, that whatever mistakes were made happened decades ago. The judge disagreed. The passage of time does not diminish the severity of these crimes, she said. A young woman was forced to live in hiding for 28 years because the people sworn to protect her chose to protect her abuser instead. Justice delayed is not justice denied. It is justice demanded. Harold Briggs was convicted on all counts. He was sentenced to 15 years in prison. Given his age, it was effectively a life sentence. He would die behind bars, stripped of the respect and authority he'd spent a lifetime accumulating. But he wasn't the only one. Former County Prosecutor William Danforth, the man who'd attended barbecues at our house while my sister was being abused upstairs, was disbarred and charged with failure to investigate credible reports of child abuse. Evidence emerged that he had received at least 2 complaints about my father over the years and done nothing. Worse, he had actively discouraged the families of victims from pursuing formal charges, warning them that going up against a respected man like Earl Edwards would destroy their reputations. Danforth pleaded guilty to avoid a trial. He was sentenced to 5 years in prison and ordered to pay restitution to 3 of my father's victims whose cases he had deliberately buried. The pastor of First Baptist Church, Reverend Thomas Holbrook, wasn't charged with any crime, but the congregation demanded his resignation after it emerged that he had counseled at least 2 families to forgive and forget when their daughters reported inappropriate behavior by my father. The church issued a formal apology to all survivors and established a fund to support abuse prevention programs. But perhaps the most significant arrest came from an unexpected direction. During the investigation, authorities discovered that Michael Chin's death in 1995 had not been an accident. Forensic experts re-examined the evidence from the crash that killed my sister's first love. The original investigation had ruled it an accident, a young man losing control on a country road. But with fresh eyes and modern technology, the truth emerged. Michael's brake lines had been cut. The investigation traced the sabotage to a man named Vernon Hodge, a mechanic at the garage where my father had his truck serviced. Vernon had been dead for 10 years, but his widow, consumed by guilt after reading Mary Catherine's story, came forward with a devastating confession. Her husband had been paid $5,000 by Earl Edwards to take care of a problem. Vernon had cut Michael's brake lines the night before the crash. He'd lived with that guilt until it drove him to drink himself to death, but he'd never told anyone except his wife. With her testimony and corroborating financial records showing a cash withdrawal from my father's account, Michael's death was officially reclassified as a homicide. Earl Edwards was posthumously named as the person responsible for commissioning the murder. Michael Chin's family finally had the truth. Their son hadn't died because of reckless driving or bad luck. He'd been murdered for the crime of loving a girl who was trying to escape a monster. The Chin family filed a wrongful death lawsuit against my father's estate. They won. Every asset Earl Edwards had accumulated over 60 years, the house, the savings, the life insurance, went to the family of the boy he'd had killed. I testified at every trial, every hearing, every proceeding. So did Mary Catherine. We sat in courtrooms and told the truth, again and again, until our voices were hoarse and our hearts were empty. But we kept going. Because every conviction, every sentence, every moment of accountability was a victory not just for us, but for everyone who had ever been silenced by powerful men and the systems that protected them. The response was overwhelming. Thousands of survivors reached out, sharing their own stories of abuse by trusted figures in their communities. There were calls for investigations into how local law enforcement had failed to protect victims for so long. Churches across the country began reassessing their volunteer screening processes. The conversation around believing women expanded in ways I hadn't anticipated. And Mary Catherine Edwards returned to the world. It wasn't easy. After 28 years of hiding, she had to relearn how to exist in public. There were panic attacks, nightmares, days when she couldn't leave the farmhouse that had been her sanctuary. We found her a therapist who specialized in long-term trauma. We took it one day at a time. But she also found joy. The women who had survived my father became a community, supporting each other through the aftermath of exposure. Strangers sent letters of gratitude and solidarity. A publisher approached her about writing a memoir, her story, in her own words, for the world to read. She said yes. The book came out a year after our father's death. Hiding in Plain Sight, a survivor's story, spent 12 weeks on the bestseller list. Mary Catherine gave interviews, spoke at conferences, became an advocate for victims of child sexual abuse. The girl who had been silenced became a voice that couldn't be ignored. As for me, I went back to Chicago. Back to my career, my apartment, my carefully constructed life. But nothing was quite the same. How could it be? I'd learned that my family was built on lies, that my father was a monster, that my mother was complicit, and that my sister had spent nearly 3 decades in exile because the world had failed her. Some truths, once learned, can't be unlearned. Some illusions, once shattered, can't be rebuilt. 6 months after the book's release, I received a letter from Mary Catherine asking me to come back to Millbrook. She didn't say why, just that there was something she needed to show me. Something important. I booked a flight that night. When I arrived at the farmhouse, now openly hers, the property transferred through legal channels that still amazed me with their complexity. She was waiting on the porch. She looked different than she had during those frantic weeks of investigation and exposure. Calmer, more at peace. "Thanks for coming," she said. "You said it was important." "It is. Walk with me." We set off down a path I hadn't noticed before, leading through the woods behind the property. The autumn leaves were turning, splashes of orange and red against the gray sky. The air smelled like decay and renewal, endings and beginnings. "I've been thinking about what comes next," Mary Catherine said as we walked. "I've spent so long fighting, hiding, surviving. I don't know how to just live." "You'll figure it out. You've figured out harder things." "Maybe. But there's something I need to do first. Something I've put off because I was afraid." "What?" She stopped walking. We had reached a small clearing, and in the center of it stood a headstone I hadn't expected. Michael Robert Chun, 1975 to 1995. Beloved son and friend. His love was real. The last line was new, added after the truth came out. After his family finally knew that their son had died a hero, trying to save a girl from a monster. "His parents buried him here," Mary Catherine said softly. "After the accident, after what we thought was an accident. They didn't want him in a cemetery where everyone could see. They were ashamed of how he died, ashamed of the rumors about us. But now they know the truth. Now everyone knows the truth." His mother came to see me last month. She's 83 years old, and she drove 4 hours just to hold my hands and tell me that she was sorry for ever doubting me. She said Michael talked about me constantly in those last weeks. He told her I was the bravest person he'd ever met. My sister's voice broke. "I wasn't brave, Danny. I ran away. I hid for almost 30 years. You survived. That takes more bravery than most people will ever understand." She knelt beside the grave, placed her hand on the stone. "I loved him. Did I tell you that? It wasn't just a teenage crush or a ticket to freedom. I really loved him. He was the first person who ever made me feel safe." "I know. And he loved you enough to die for you. I'm so sorry I couldn't save him. You couldn't have known what Dad would do. No one could have predicted that. But I knew he was dangerous. I knew what he was capable of. I should have warned Michael. I should have. Stop. I knelt beside her, put my arm around her shoulders. You were 17 years old. You were a victim. The only person responsible for Michael's death is the man who paid to have him killed. And that man is dead, his name is destroyed, and his accomplices are in prison. That's justice, Mary Cat. That's more than most survivors ever get. She was quiet for a moment, communing with a ghost I couldn't see. Then she stood, brushed the dirt from her knees, and turned to me with something new in her eyes. Something that looked almost like hope. I have an idea, she said, about what comes next. For both of us. What kind of idea? A foundation. A real one, with real resources dedicated to helping survivors escape abusive situations. Legal aid, safe houses, therapy, job training. All the things I didn't have, but should have. We could use the book money, approach donors, make it something meaningful. That's a big undertaking. I know. That's why I want you to help me run it. I stared at her. Me? I'm a journalist. I don't know anything about nonprofits. You know how to tell stories. You know how to make people care about things. And you know our story better than anyone. We could do this together, Danny. We could turn our father's legacy of pain into something that actually helps people. It was ambitious, probably foolish, almost certainly more complicated than either of us could imagine. I said yes. The Edwards Foundation for Survivors of Family Abuse launched 2 years after that conversation in the clearing. We started small. A single safe house in Nashville, a hotline staffed by volunteers, a legal fund that helped survivors navigate custody battles and protective orders. Within 5 years, we had operations in 12 states. The Edwards name, once synonymous with respected church member and loving father, had been completely transformed. Now it represented something different. The power of truth to overcome even the most entrenched lies. Mary Catherine became the public face of the foundation. She was extraordinary at it, speaking with passion and authority about the realities of abuse, demolishing myths about victims, holding institutions accountable for their failures. She was interviewed by every major news outlet, testified before Congress, and received humanitarian awards from organizations that had once looked the other way when women like her asked for help. I worked behind the scenes, managing operations, developing strategies, and occasionally writing articles that helped keep our work in the public consciousness. It wasn't glamorous, but it was meaningful. For the first time in my life, I felt like I was using my skills for something that truly mattered. We had setbacks, of course. Funding droughts, staff burnout, the exhausting work of trying to fix systemic problems with limited resources. There were days when the weight of other people's suffering threatened to crush us both. But we kept going. Survivors kept reaching out. Stories kept being told. Change, slow and halting, kept happening. And then, 10 years after the foundation launched, something unexpected occurred. A letter arrived at our main office, addressed to both of us. The return address was a prison in Texas. The name on it was one we didn't recognize at first, but the contents made everything clear. Dear Ms. Edwards and Mr. Porter, the letter began. My name is Robert Chun. I am Michael Chen's younger brother. I was only 8 years old when Michael died, and I never knew the truth about what happened until I read your sister's book 6 months ago. I watched my parents suffer for decades, believing their son died because he was reckless. Knowing the truth, knowing he was murdered for trying to help someone he loved, has changed everything for them. For me too. I am currently serving a 15-year sentence for crimes I committed while I was young and lost and angry at the world. Michael's death broke something in my family, and I spent years trying to fill that void in all the wrong ways. But your story gave me something I haven't had in a long time. Hope. I'm writing to tell you that Michael never stopped believing in you, Mary Catherine. Right until the end, he believed you would get free. He would be so proud of what you've accomplished. And he would want you to know that his love for you was real, and that nothing, not death, not time, not the evil men do, could take that away. Mary Catherine wept when she read it. Then she wrote back. That correspondence became a friendship. Robert Chun was eventually released on parole, thanks in part to legal advocacy from our foundation. He joined our team, working with young men who were at risk of going down the same path he had. He became, in his own words, the brother Michael never got to be. We held a ceremony at Michael's grave to mark the 10-year anniversary of the Foundation's founding. Mary Catherine spoke about loss and love and the unexpected ways healing finds us. Robert said prayers in the tradition of his family. I read a poem that Mary Catherine had written years ago, during the darkest days of her hiding, about a light that refuses to go out. When it was over, we stood together in that clearing. 3 people whose lives had been shaped by the same tragedy, now united in the work of preventing others from suffering similar fates. I never thought I'd be here, Mary Catherine said, standing in the open, speaking my truth, watching the people who hurt me and protected my abuser face real consequences, living a life that actually feels like mine. You earned this, I told her. Every bit of it. We earned it together. She looked at Robert. All of us. Michael included. Robert nodded, his eyes bright. He'd be so proud. Both of my brother, and of what his love started. We walked back through the woods as the sun began to set, the 3 of us bound by history and purpose and the stubborn human insistence on making something good out of something terrible. I am 63 years old now. My hair is gray, my joints ache in the morning, and I've outlived more friends than I care to count. But I'm still here, still writing, still telling stories that matter. The Foundation celebrated its 30th anniversary last month. Mary Catherine gave the keynote speech, as she does every year, and even after all this time, there wasn't a dry eye in the room. She's 75 now, still fierce, still funny, still the strongest person I've ever known. The scars are still there, they always will be, but they've become part of a larger story. A story of survival and transformation and the extraordinary things that happen when one person refuses to stay silent. We've helped over 50,000 survivors in 3 decades. 50,000 people who found safety, healing, and the chance to rebuild their lives. 50,000 stories that might have ended in tragedy, but didn't. Every single one of them matters. Every single one of them is proof that the work is worth doing. I think about my father sometimes. Not often. He doesn't deserve that much of my attention, but sometimes. I think about Harold Briggs dying in prison, his badge and his reputation stripped away. I think about William Danforth, the prosecutor who protected predators, spending his final years as a convicted criminal. I think about Vernon Hodges' widow, who found the courage to tell the truth after decades of silence, giving Michael's family the closure they deserved. Justice came slowly. It came imperfectly, but it came. And that's what I want you to remember about this story. It's not just about the evil that men do in the shadows. It's about what happens when the light finally reaches those shadows. It's about accountability. It's about the truth's stubborn refusal to stay buried forever. The photograph that started all of this, the one that arrived under my apartment door 30 years ago, sits on my desk now, framed and faded. Mary Catherine in front of the farmhouse, her dark hair caught by a forgotten wind. She never left town, the back of it says. She didn't leave town, but she left the prison my father tried to build for her. She left the silence and the shame and the lies. She walked out of the shadows and into a life that belongs to her, full of purpose and love and the kind of peace that survivors have to fight for every single day. I'm so proud of her. I'm so grateful that photograph brought her back to me. And I'm so honored to have spent my life standing beside her, helping to tell her story and watching her turn pain into power. Some stories end with dramatic confrontations or last-minute rescues or villains brought to justice. This story ends with all of those things and something more. It ends with a brother and sister sitting on the porch of a farmhouse on a summer evening, watching the lightning bugs come out, talking about everything and nothing. It ends with peace earned through struggle, justice won through persistence, love that survived everything designed to destroy it. If you take nothing else from this story, take that. Whether you're currently suffering, currently escaping, or carrying the weight of decades-old pain, there is hope. There is help. There are people who will believe you and fight for you and stand beside you through the hardest parts. And there is justice. Sometimes it takes 30 years. Sometimes it takes longer. But the truth has a way of finding the light. The guilty have a way of facing consequences. The systems that protect abusers have a way of crumbling when enough people demand accountability. You're not alone. You never were. And your story isn't over yet. Mary Catherine Edwards disappeared in 1995. She was found in 2023. The men who enabled her abuser went to prison. Her first love was finally recognized as the hero he always was. And she's been changing the world ever since. This has been her story. It's also mine. And if it resonated with you at all, I hope you'll share it with someone who needs to hear it. Because stories like this only have power when they spread. When they reach the people who are still hiding. When they light a candle in someone else's darkness. Thank you for listening until the end. Thank you for believing. And remember, the truth will always find a way out. Always. And when it does, justice follows.